Today, Christians are celebrating Palm Sunday, sometimes named Passion Sunday. And this is the beginning of the week when Jesus travels to Jerusalem. It ends in the crucifixion and after that. So most Christian churches are handing out palms today. I brought a palm from my local florist. That's a pretty big thing. That's a good idea of what a palm could be. And they would be reading that story of adulation in Matthew that Jesus is riding into Jerusalem on an ass. The people are very excited. They are trying to protect him in some way. That maybe the road is dusty, maybe it's muddy, but they're putting down their garments, it says, maybe their cloaks or coats or whatever, onto the road. And they're also cutting down branches, which gets interpreted as palms, because that's the kind of branches they've had, put them on the road. And so that became the tradition that on this day we bring them into church. And sometimes people even get to wave them around or process with them. So that's not our thing, though. So we're going to actually look a little bit for a short time at the Passion Sunday side of the story. And that I'm going to turn a little bit differently to the Gospel of John. And it's the most recently written of the Gospels. It's considered to be the least factual, the most mystical. Okay, poetry. And the passion part we're interested in is a dialogue between Jesus, a barefoot rabbi, as some politician recently called him, and a Roman ruler named Pontius Pilate. They're having a talk about truth, of all things. This little dialogue is happening just before Pilate is going to send Jesus off to be crucified, to be killed, right? He's got it in his power. He doesn't really want to, though. He's been interrogating Jesus, questioning back and forth, because he really doesn't like this idea. He's been told he needs to have Jesus crucified, and he's going, hey, he's not a criminal. Didn't they do anything wrong? He knows that while these people are mad, other people really like the guy. So he knows he's going to get a lot of trouble. So he's trying really hard not to have to authorize this crucifixion. So he says, well, Jesus, come on. You're not really a God. They're accusing you of blasphemy. Just tell me you're not a God. And Jesus won't go there. He doesn't say one way or the other. But they get in this little back and forth. Jesus says, his life bears witness to the truth. That's an interesting answer. Are you God? Well, my life bears witness to the truth. So Pilate goes, what is truth? Well, that's all the passion story you're going to get. That's where we're going. What is truth? What is truth? Interesting question. I'm glad that we got to hear that in the story that's traditionally read today. I'm going to begin with a small truth. Yep. I'm going to begin by picking up the light. It's something my mom used to say. A place for everything, and everything in its place. Anybody's mom used to say that, or grandmother? She used to say that often, but she always said it with a certain preface. As your grandmother used to say, a place for everything, and everything in its place. It's an old adage. So is it a truth? I think my mother was signaling that it wasn't really her truth. I'm not sure if it really was my grandmother's truth. My mom, my grandmother, they might have aspired to this kind of a way of being, to having everything in the right place. But I'm here to testify, I bet my brother can testify too, that my mom was always misplacing items, whatever she needed, always enlisting one of her many children to go find whatever it is that was supposed to be in its place but wasn't in its place, so. But I start with this lightest of ideas about truth in order to illustrate a caveat. The truth is that any truth usually has more than one side to it, right? I myself believe, yes, that there's a place for everything and everything should be in its place, but that doesn't stop me also from that occasional ballyhoo treasure hunt, for whatever I've lost. Meanwhile, I try to remind myself with those words of wisdom from Thich Nhat Hanh. I read these years ago. It's not the spoon that is lost, it's you who are lost. So whatever we are distracted by something not being in its place or some other missing part of the truth in our lives, it's important to try to also keep the center, also return to the peace. That's where I aspire to be, not always. The truth is that any truth is hard enough to grasp, let alone to hang on to carry out, to understand, no matter how valued we may find it for our lives. Truth, admittedly, is hard to define. Perhaps it's similar to that thorny issue taken up by the Supreme Court in 1964. They had a case before them, and they could not figure out how to define pornography. So this wonderful Justice Potter Stewart says simply, I know it when I see it. I know it when I experience it. There's a line in one of our hymnal words, I know the truth, it liveth. I know it when I experience it. Okay. Today I wanted to start with telling you some truths that I had experienced recently. They're not earth-shaking. They're not unique. Truths come to all of us. This I certainly believe. And these are little ideas, You might have had way more profound truths come to you recently. Truth turns us around. Truth wakes us up. Truth blesses us. What brought me to this sermon idea was a strange thing, an odd truth. It started with something I heard on NPR recently, and it got into my craw, and I kept turning it over, coming back to it. Truth has a way of being insistent, right? Of returning and, knocking again and again at these reticent minds of ours as often as is needed. And that by itself is a newish truth for me. I had not really thought about the feisty nature of our minds that sometimes act like a parent or a spouse, nudging, encouraging, trying to hope, reminding that you will spend a little time with that emerging truth within so that it can blossom into fullness. So the newish truth I experience is that truth emerges for us in a way that is quite hard to ignore, no matter how hard we try to ignore it. Truth works very hard to get our attention. Back to that NPR story. Two hosts shared a letter they read from someone who witnessed to the idea that person who wrote the letter had enjoyed being a patient at a hospital recently. They said it was like a good vacation. Those radio show hosts guffawed heartily, of course. Oh, he should get a life kind of a thing. I came, though, to realize this truth. It's not unlike those fake vacations we get when there's been a blizzard or a hurricane, some major disruption in our lives that stops it all, derails whatever we think is so important, and causes us to just be knocked down on our butts for a little bit, forced, compelled to wait, to idle, maybe to rest, to change our usual patterns, maybe just temporarily, And it's when some version of catastrophe strikes. Maybe it's the weather, maybe it's illness, or, an accident. Cataclysmic happenings in our lives that, or like being hospitalized, going back to the original statement. So I'm thinking of the big D's: death, disease, divorce, disaster. All the stuff we wouldn't even wish on our enemies. And I'm going to add an aside to fill out those disastrous D's, because they come into our lives at times. They are the ones that give us a timeout from our usual time. And it's a quote I read. It was just last month when the Reverend Jesse Jackson passed away, and so many of his quotes were out there. This was what he said at the 1984 Democratic National Convention. "My constituency is the desperate, the damned, the disinherited, the disrespected, and the despised. They're restless. They seek relief." A little bit of the truth. Those disastrous D's that knock us on our backsides, that send us to the hospital, to other places, can they be at all like a vacation? I guess it depends on how the disastrous D's disrupt our lives. For example, we would not like it at all if blizzards kept us parked inside for 3 long months. But if we get 3 days where we don't have to go do our usual, we're kind of usually pretty glad. No matter how much we love our usual lives, at work, at school, in our neighborhood, wherever we're doing our doings, the truth is that we really love a major disruption now and then, the kind that knocks us out of that same old, gives us a break from the life that we usually lead, the life that we indeed love with great passion, but maybe we just need to scuttle it a bit now and then. Earlier this year, my husband was in the hospital for weeks. And I put aside my usual life to drive back and forth and to be with him at more than one hospital on his journey back from brain surgery. It was kind of like a major blizzard for us, knocked us on our backsides. Seemingly, there was no reason at all to find it to be anything resembling a vacation, as that NPR letter writer had contended. And yet, I found a strange solace in everything being upside down, but in also, especially, that folks were so very kind. Man, I didn't have to cook for more than a month. It was great. Having a major life interruption also can't help but remind one of what's truly important, of love, of hope, of truth. The truth is that no one wants to be stuck in a hospital or have their loved one stuck in a hospital, but nevertheless, anyway, it's kind of a good experience. It kind of was for Bruce and for me, and not exactly a vacation, but the truth was similar enough to that NPR letter writer's idea. The truth is that while we love and need stability, we also need and thrive upon disruption. Another unusual truth came my way recently, and the relentless fallout from the Epstein files. As the names of the various famous people were found to be in their files, their responses were often first ones of self-defense, distancing themselves from that monster. It would have been one thing if those powerful men and a few women were simply going to say, "I did nothing illegal, either with girls or otherwise, with Jeffrey Epstein," but that's not what we tended to hear, at least not simply that. They needed to say, oh, I wouldn't associate at all with someone that despicable. Or, oh no, I only went to Epstein for financial advice. Or, oh, we just partied and there's nothing wrong with partying, although there is with some parties. The truth I noticed was that in the process of falling all over themselves to seem as innocent as possible, the Epstein class sometimes betrayed a basic part of their humanity, relationship. And I was reminded of a time in my life when I actually had fairly good friends who were murderers, and at least one was a child rapist. Pretty sure he liked me a lot because I was kind of a young girl at the time, but we became friends. The truth is that our mission should be to hate the crime, not the criminal, that we are meant to love our enemies, or at least to try to, at least I believe that, to be part of every stumbling person's life that intersects with ours in a positive and affirming way. That is how we help to redeem our world. Now, if someone is a horrible human being, we are not made innocent by regretting our relationship with that person. I don't regret the friendships I made in that prison. Now, we may have to distance ourselves in order to stay safe, and that is true. That is part of it. But we're not made whole by simply cutting someone out of our lives to save our reputations. The truth is that relationships are important. I recently finished reading a marvelous novel called Isola by Allegra Goodman. Anybody read it? Anybody out there? Okay, I recommend it. The book is centered, and this is March, Women's History Month. It's centered around an actual true story. It's a novel, but it's a true story that I bet none of you have ever heard about. In the history of the exploration of America, there was a woman aboard a ship in the 16th century. She came over here. We don't know nothing about her. They don't talk about her. Well, this woman who wrote the book found her story and put it into a novel. Until quite far into the book, I thought the woman's name was Isola, the title of the book. No, her name was Marguerite. And when I finished reading the book, I still had no clue why the book was called Isola. Now, some of you maybe are a little more word-oriented than I am, but I had to look it up. The word means island. Isola, isolated island, related words. Marguerite is isolated. Partly, she's isolated as a woman by the historical circumstances which are contributing to her oppression. Partly, she's further isolated by a man's cruelty. He maroons her on an island. She's also isolated early in the story by living for herself vainly, selfishly, and she changes. The story is evolving, and in the end, she does live for herself bravely and lovingly. No man is an island, wrote John Donne. I am an island, wrote Paul Simon. The truth is that we are an island unto ourselves, alone, isolated, and the truth is also that no one is ever entirely isolated and only unto themselves. For we all live as part of the whole, no matter how island-like our lives may seem at times. The truth is that sometimes two disparate ideas are both true. My mom, with her husband, lovingly raised 9 children, tended her aging parents who lived right next door. It was part of a web of relationships, and yet, also, she told me that she was entirely alone when she gave birth. It had surprised her. She was warning me when I was pregnant. No one else can actually do it for you, she explained. You're the only one who can go through that hullabaloo. Yeah. My brother died of a brain tumor as a young boy, and I believe my mother was also isolated during that time, though she was part of a large, loving web of relationships, had lots of help and support, and was also alone on that years-long journey caring for him in the midst of it all. So she wrote out of that grief, that isolation, a nice long book about the whole story, a novel based on the family's experience, more of a memoir. So she was an island. She was part of whole and loving relationships. That's the truth of life. We are always in both. And the last truth I want to talk about is the hard work we have in naming hard truths. I love my country. I also hate what my country does and stands for at times, now especially. I hate war. And it's hard for me to use the word hate. It feels like a poison. But I have to name this truth. I read this recent reflection by a minister. Lately, I have found myself using a phrase that some people resist. I have called the growing network of federal detention centers what they are: concentration camps. The term unsettles some. It should. A concentration camp is a place where human beings are gathered in concentration, removed from ordinary legal protections, and held until they are dispatched elsewhere. That's not rhetorical flourish. It is a description. How hard to hear this truth, especially since my dad liberated concentration camps in Germany at the end of World War II, and since our country has apologized to Japanese Americans for doing our own version of concentration camps in this country at that time. But today, my tax dollars and your tax dollars are paying for what are essentially concentration camps at use now here in America. That is a truth. I hate it. It's poison to me. I love American values. I love the Bill of Rights, the understanding of our experiment in democracy that's been going on for some time. I hate that we betray much of it. That is a hard, hard truth. In summary, truth is not clearly one thing. It's hard to define, to realize, to understand, to hang on to follow. And yet truth is persistent and insistent. The truth is that we need both stability and disruption, that relationships are important, that two disparate ideas can both be true, that our lives are both isolated and interconnected, and that it's hard to name hard truths, but we must for our good and for the good of the world. The truth is that as diligent as I have tried to be in bringing these reflections about truth forward for you, they will not all be truth for all of you. I know that. Some of you are yes, and some of you are not that. That's not quite right. The truth is that you have to plow the field of truth for yourself. Sorry. Simone de Beauvoir wrote this, and it sounds very Unitarian Universalist to me. I tore myself away from the safe comfort of certainties through my love for the truth, and truth rewarded me. Well, bless you, and may truth emerge in your lives to reward you with peace and with joy.